a Muslim, you have a political identity. Yes, I have come to terms with a statement that is upheld by right-wing talking points, political pundits, and colonialists since the 16th century. A controversial statement that views a religious group of people as an other who all have the same political beliefs and almost a telepathic way of communication. I have internalized the concept of a political identity in order to fight it. Throughout this talk, I want to try to explain not who I am, but why I am, and how that helped me face and combat injustices in the political realities minorities in this country face. I want to paint you all a picture of some moments from my childhood. Moments that seem subtle, that are subtle. Moments that I did not understand, nor have I reflected on until the formulation of this TED Talk I'm giving right now. I grew up in a local mosque at 8 years old. And I remember I sat in my Quran class as I would every Saturday. The Sheikh told me to repeat after him. فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. With hardship comes ease. Verily, with hardship comes ease. I stopped upon hearing a knock at the door. The Sheikh sighed in frustration as if he knew what lied ahead and got up and opened the door. I was able to spot a police officer through its cracks. He stood there with an alarming presence, examining his surroundings. And when the officer was done, he put his hand on the Sheikh's shoulder in a patronizing fashion, almost giving him permission to go back inside. When the Sheikh came, he looked at me with a discerning look and said he wanted to see what I was doing. At 10 years old, I sat in my school's library attempting to work on a project, when an instructor came up to me and asked where my family was from. When he was unsatisfied with my response of being from the Bronx, I said my family was from Palestine. He proceeded to tell me that he was an Israeli soldier and wondered what I thought about the superfluous obsession the Palestinians had over a strip of land. I stared blankly at first, naively nodded in agreement. At 11 years old, I was asked if I was sad that Osama bin Laden was killed. My confusion over the need for me to express my emotions was followed by, "You all know each other, don't you?" Fast forward to a few weeks ago on a Friday, and I'm watching the news per usual, and I see that 51 Muslims were gunned down in a place of worship by the physical manifestations of hate and white supremacy. We all measure our lives in moments that help us tell our stories. Whether it is finding love, experiencing tragedy, or a distant childhood memory that never really left us. The stories we tell are the ones that shape the way we think and explain who we are. And upon writing this TED Talk, one thing became glaringly obvious. I am in the midst of my story, unable to fully distance myself to reflect on who I am, because again, I am too busy trying to explain why I am. These aforementioned incidents have lost its shocking factor because, unfortunately, I still live them. The politicization of being Muslim, Palestinian, before an American has led me to become an activist. It was through the understanding that in order to not be seen as an other, we must first understand why it is we are one. What is it about the way I am, the way I dress, and where my parents are from that make me a threat? In order to want things to be different, I had to first ask one of the most important questions any human can ask: why? For me, I realized that in order to be a change maker, you have to acknowledge the realities of wanting change, of inspiring change, and finally achieving change. And in order to do any of that, we must acknowledge that you have to be a little mad. And yes, mad in the sense of rage and fury, but also mad in needing to be a little delirious, to be aware of a future unlike the one you're currently in, and to entertain an alternative reality. Activists must be mad and able to distance themselves from their realities to envision one that must be better. And as I describe my childhood memories, I want to describe the realities that allowed myself and many others to have the opportunity to adopt a creative imagination that called us mad. The police officer who often visited my mosque was part of the NYPD surveillance program, which spied on the Muslim community for years. The same program after 9/11 that was fixated on our community's link to terrorism, yet never led to a single guilty verdict. The same program that has engaged in religious profiling by singling out religious leaders like my sheikh. The same program that operated under the assumption that there is a broad political affiliations amongst all Muslims and told us we need to earn the label of good. Yet, the sheikh persisted. He taught and held himself as a community leader in which young Muslims like myself believed we could peacefully thrive in the West. As a Palestinian from the diaspora who looks towards the realities of Gaza, I have no excuse to not be a creative human. The realities in Gaza should have crushed the spirits of those living there. To be alive in an open-air prison that is deemed uninhabitable by the year 2020, to go and protest your conditions and demand your right to self-determination when it is only met with snipers and bullets that are anything but rubber. The imagination and what can only be described as delusion to believe a protest can truly change any of that was crazy to me at first. But then understanding that Palestinians aren't willing to risk their lives because they crave death. They risk themselves because they crave life. On the plantations during the dark periods of American slavery, the enslaved people would sing as they worked in the fields. At first, you question why. And then, it seems obvious, and you question why not. They sung to preserve themselves for the future, to preserve their imagination, because without it, they'd have to give in to reality that functions to undermine their existence. Muslims, Palestinians, African Americans, and yet the same concept of powerful resistance. And it was this realization that made me believe that since the start of all injustice, the preservation of our imagination is a common theme in all of our movements, in all of our struggles. And it was high school that illuminated my realization of this, understanding that injustice is present in all aspects of society, and that I should never be complacent. I had the opportunity to speak at an integrated high school. Students from all racial, economic, and educational backgrounds were in a single classroom. And as someone who went to a school that was an affluent, white, public high school, the feeling of diversity and inclusivity felt abnormal to me. I couldn't understand why. After hours of research, that abnormal feeling I learned was because New York City has one of the most segregated school systems in the country. And as a product of a segregated education system, diversity seemed only to be a distant, progressive talking point. We often take for granted opportunities like this conference where students from various backgrounds can come together and interact with one another. We do not take into consideration that in certain parts of the country, a black or white student has never had a single class with the other. We complain about our country being so divisive and toxic, yet we fail to realize our self-segregation is a result of being institutionally segregated since it was first written into law during the Jim Crow era, a period in history where they championed separatism and othering. Although we've come a long way from the dark period of Jim Crow, the realities we face today are undoubtedly a bitter aftertaste from such an era. We call it systemic racism. After researching and understanding an issue that has fallen right under our noses, I felt it was a personal responsibility to do something about it. So I continuously spoke out about the injustices of school segregation, about how close to 7 decades after Brown versus Board of Education, we still have the audacity to paint certain types of students as worthy for a quality education and others not. And for a long time, no one listened. As a student, I was delegitimized. As I spoke, I was simply referred to as a girl who was too arrogant. But what my then adversaries didn't realize is that you can't simply write off this generation of powerful youth as immature. Because these so-called kids contribute to the economy, contribute to the market, contribute to society. You don't call us kids when we're about to take out a sum of money that resembles a mortgage in order to go to college. You don't call us kids when Black and Latino youth are incarcerated in adult prisons with adult sentences for low-level offenses. You didn't see Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Tamir Rice, and Cameron Tillman as kids when they were shot and killed by police officers. So why is it that we're only kids when we want to fix the wrongs of society? And it is only then we are painted with an adolescent ignorance. Why only when we speak from experience to demand what is right are we told that our experiences are invalid, that we lack the maturity to be heard? The good news is that I'm a part of a group of students creating the organization Integrate New York City, and now is one of the leading organizations influencing education policies in New York and around the country. But I want to return to my aforementioned point. The greatest activists and leaders of our time were told that they were too ambitious, too radical, too idealistic. The great leaders of history, such as Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela, Angela Davis, were all ridiculed, imprisoned, and written off as enemies of society. The reason why these great leaders were ignored and sidelined for years before they inspired change is because they were too creative. They were also a little mad in every sense of the word. They imagined a society different than the one they lived in. Nelson Mandela spent the majority of his activist years in a jail cell before apartheid was abolished in South Africa. He understood there could be a period in time where power can be restored to the people, and with a graceful patience and willful resilience, it soon did. In today's era, the creative are not respected. Our elders are repeating the mistakes of the past while they call us too delusional for suggesting results. We're too delusional for saying Black lives matter and that we deserve a free college education. We're too delusional for demanding a cleaner environment and to point out that there's no reason for perpetual war. We're too delusional for thinking immigrants deserve to be treated as human beings, and too delusional to think healthcare is not a privilege but a right. Too delusional to believe that Palestine shouldn't be occupied and that 51 people shouldn't be killed by a white supremacist. We're too delusional, they say. Yet, if all of this constitutes being delusional, then maybe it's a good thing to be delusional. If it means you're an empathetic human being that can't stand the realities of today, then take being delusional as a compliment. And if I learned one thing from my time doing activism, it's that your efforts are never in vain. You can either change the world or change one person's point of view. Both are incredibly important. My sheikh told me to repeat after him. It was a verse from the Quran. Inna ma'al usri yusra, fa inna ma'al usri yusra. With hardship comes ease. Verily, with hardship